In January of 2020, I had plans. I had a lot of plans. I was the rector of a church. We had a lot of plans. We were planning for Lent, for Holy Week. We had big plans. We had our big strategic plan, the 5-year one with stages and meetings and flip charts. There were so many good plans. My church was the first one to close for the pandemic. We had an early exposure, or so we thought. And so I called our bishop and we shut it down. Didn't go back for 16 months. And all of those plans that we had, the plans the vestry and I had been working on, the plans that were building out towards our growth and our future, we were not going to let go of those plans. We just said put them on hold. I remember saying to the congregation, this Holy Week we have planned and this Easter? Well, we're going to put a pin in Easter and we're just going to do our Easter service on our first Sunday back, right? Just hang on for a couple weeks. The pandemic forced all of us into a rest we did not want, we did not choose, and frankly, many of us did not care for. Because we are people with plans. I was not the only one with plans. We were all building and envisioning our lives, putting together future for ourselves, for our family and our friends, for our communities, and those places we were a part of. And then all of it had to be paused. Despite Jesus frequently telling us about the glory of rest, the need for Sabbath, it is rarely something we actually have baked into our lives. And the space in the context of being forced upon us did not very restful. But it had elements of the Sabbath that Jesus pushes us towards. The true stopping and holding of what we're doing, not just the delaying of what we're going to do to the next day. The slowing down of our lives to take away the grind that so many were living under. During that early pandemic, we saw changes in our pollution levels. The gift of Sabbath for our earth, our mother home. Jesus calls the disciples to rest. In the midst of all of this busyness, in the midst of all of this ministry and work, we've had the calling of the disciples a couple chapters ago. We had our little side trip with the beheading of John the Baptist, and now we're back here. And they're going to go on to do miraculous things in chapters to come. But before we can do that, we are called to rest. During the pandemic, I was dealing with all of these plans that got put on hold, and so I, as many did, started to move everything online. How many things could we put online? How busy could we appear to be? Oh, that resonated. How busy can we appear to be? We started turning out adult formation and Zooms left and right for the glory of saying we were still open for business. And finally, we did an adult formation on a book called Sabbath as Resistance by a contemporary theologian, Walter Brueggemann, Old Testament professor, written much prior to the pandemic. But even then, noticing our culture of busyness, our culture of consuming, of capitalism, and the pervasiveness of that even in our churches. Because we did have to deal with capitalism when the world shut down, and how to keep our buildings alive, and how to exist in a world that we are in. Sabbath as resistance pushed the idea and the theology that rest, true rest, the fighting of our culture of everything and the necessity of consuming and more that comes from outside of us is pulling us away from God. That to choose rest is radical. To choose Sabbath is rebellious. And that is a rebellion that God calls us to. We have fallen into a trap as churches by, all good intentions of being busier and busier and busier to keep up with our neighbors and mega churches and every secular option that is out there to entertain and impress people. But we are not meant to be entertainment, and we are not meant to impress. We are meant to connect with God. We can't do that when we're chasing busyness. We can't connect with God when what we do is a means to the end of keeping our building open and the lights turned on. Sabbath is countercultural, and it is holy. In 2016, a ministry was started very similar to the title of Walter Brueggemann's book, talking about rest as resistance. They started something called the Nap Ministry, which is exactly what it sounds like, a call for the sacredness of napping. And we're laughing, but how holy is rest? What does it do for your soul? We as individuals were pushed into a solitude and Sabbath that we did not choose. It's hard to get the full joy and holiness out of that. But we saw glimpses and tastes of what might be possible if we chose more Sabbath in our own lives. We saw glimpses of it in the healing of the earth. Perhaps you saw glimpses of it in your own life. How's your garden looking? Your craft hobby? Did you get through some books in the last 4 years? We've slowed down, and that's okay. If we're able to do that as individuals, how do we pull it through into the rest of our culture? Jesus has been shouting from the rooftops since day one that we need to rest. How do we bring that into our culture, our faith community, our church? Not to do for the sake of doing, but to praise and worship God for the sake of our souls. Not to compete with our neighbors, not to keep up with some mega church with thousands of members, because they don't have our organ. I like this better anyways. Rest is holy and good. We are called to it by God, and we are resistant to engaging in it. That we might fall short, that we might not keep up, that we might be lazy, that we might be ungodly. And yet it is one of the holiest things that Christ calls us to do. So let us rest. In these seasons of in-between, as we find ourselves as a faith community, as we're in a season of in-between leadership, in seasons of discernment, in seasons of summer, let us find space to breathe and be okay in restfulness, in the lack of movement, to listen to where God calls us in that space. There is a monastic saint, Saint Benedict, who has a rhythm of life, a way of life that he taught in his monastic tradition that has seeped into ours as we sort of have our holdover from Catholic faith and tradition in our little Anglican remnants. But one of his teachings was that God is present in the here and now. And if we stop and if we listen for that voice, we can see where God is already. Not what we have to create or build up so that God will show up here or that we will finally be saved, but already exactly where we are, God is. So let us rest and listen to that voice to find where God is and celebrate the presence of the Spirit in our lives, in our work, and in our rest. For it is holy and it is good. Amen.